Theaters, opera halls, concert venues were all hit hard by the pandemic. People didn't want to gather in close quarters. Well, to get a gauge on how and where people might now be participating in the arts once again, the National Endowment for the Arts, the NEA, focused on this topic in its most recent 5-year survey. For more on the methodology and how the results guide NEA activities, we turn to the agency's Director of Research and Analysis, Sunil Iyengar. Mr. Iyengar, good to have you with us.
Great to be here, Tom. Thanks.
Well, first of all, this is an every 5-year survey. Tell us the purpose and the aims of conducting a survey and who you conduct it among.
That's correct. Well, just to back up here, we are, of course, the National Endowment for the Arts, which is, an independent federal agency that's charged with promoting access and opportunities to participate in the arts nationwide in all the different forms and ways of participating in the arts, from creating art to learning about it to engaging through as an audience member and using technology and engaging with the arts that way. So that's really in our remit and the way we support grants and initiatives around the country to do that work. So to be a responsible federal funder, one of the things we do, of course, is collect data and analyze it from time to time. So we have actually had baked into our data collections since really the early 1980s, believe it or not, Tom, partnerships with the U.S. Census Bureau, whereby we collect through household survey data, very reliable response rate, very reliable survey frameworks where they, of course, capture the diversity of the U.S. population and reflect it very well in the numbers. We managed to collect data on how Americans participate in arts activities. This is a survey of adults 18 and over. And so the most recent survey was in 2022. Again, the first survey was in 1982. So we've come a long way. And yes, we do it roughly every 5 years. And we use these data to report to the general public, to arts practitioners, organizations, administrators, but also, as I say, the general public, including journalists like yourself, to understand how arts have evolved in this country, and particularly how different people now are engaging with the arts and on different platforms and different venues. And that then in turn informs some of our work as an agency to try to, reach the most number of people in the most, effective ways.
And with respect to attending performances, say, is how most people come in contact with the arts, or going to galleries, that is, as consumers of art. Have things mostly returned to the way they were in 2018, or has there been some alteration even with the mostly receded pandemic?
Well, actually, Tom, it's interesting. The most common way people kind of get their art, so to speak, or engage with the arts is actually through consumption by digital media. That may be no surprise when you think about how many people listen to music, while driving, or listen to the wherever they are, but also other ways, especially through new virtual opportunities to engage with the arts. So that's actually been fairly constantly the highest proportion of adults participating in the arts. So that's 75% of adults. Then you're correct. The next highest level, one of the next highest things is actually attending, say, a gallery or performance, or through visiting or attending events.
Sure.
And that could also be true of, let me just be clear, performing arts at festivals and, outdoor activities. So yes, you're right. As a composite, those activities have actually declined since the survey prior to this, which was in 5 years earlier in 2017. And that may not have surprised a lot of people. But what I think was kind of startling is how certain art forms saw particularly precipitous, kind of declines, like in theater, for example, going to theater, where I think the rate of decline was something like 40% or higher. And you saw that also with other art forms like, dance and some of those kinds of, live arts events in the past. And we, again, we weren't surprised by how stark those declines are, especially when you think about the differences in demographic group participation. But I will say that there were two kind of counterpoints to that. One was people going to, one of the things we capture are people visiting places to enjoy the design or architecture of a place, or, that can be true of, buildings, monuments, or neighborhoods, but also kind of parks, national parks, or any other kinds of parks. Those kinds of activities actually stayed, didn't take a very severe decline. It dipped a little bit, but was roughly the same in many respects. And I think that has to do, of course, with people's general comfort level with outdoor activities, perhaps, because a lot of those things are outdoors.
You also noticed an interesting phenomenon, a decline, and this has been steady for a couple of surveys, 10 years, a decline in fiction reading.
Yes, that's correct. So reading in general, we did see percentage of people reading books in general decline a little bit, but we also saw, as you say, a very steep decline. Over time, we've seen it in fiction reading, that is reading novels or short stories. So it's about 38% of adults now who do that, whereas in the past it was maybe over 50%. I say this because not to just to sort of be a worrywart about it, but I think it's important to realize these trends can be reversed. Years and years ago, there was a similar dip. And for example, the NEA galvanized around a program called the Big Read, which is one of our national initiatives, which still is very strong. And it sort of supports the idea of one book, one community, efforts where there are
Sure.
book clubs and participation activities around books and reading. And that, along with a variety of other factors, mobilization by libraries and, literacy organizations and writers, helped to drive up the reading rates a few years ago. So, in fiction reading. So I think hopefully, there's going to be some more momentum around this and people recognizing
Right.
that it's unacceptable to have such low rates of reading when we want to cultivate imagination, empathy, and all those capacities reading affords.
We are speaking with Sunil Iyengar. He is Director of Research and Analysis at the National Endowment for the Arts. And we've been talking about the consumption side, and most of the consumers are not where grants go, but rather to creators. What are some of the trends revealed in 2022 survey on the art creation side? Probably just as much fiction being written as there was, even if nobody's reading it.
Yeah, we don't have as much, not to get too technical here, but we are talking a federal news network. So I'll just say quickly that one of the things to know is that although we have really good long-term trend data on the attendance side, when it comes to reporting on creating, some of those questions have varied over the years because of different explosive, new forms of creating art. As we all know, a lot of it through technology. So we haven't been able to retain the same questions for years and years. We've changed them. So it's harder to make year-over-year comparisons for creating art. That said, still a very healthy, more than half, 52% of adults did some sort of creating, personal creation or performance of art, which is wonderful to know. And that also, seems to have remained roughly constant, although we can't make definite comparisons. It looks like over the numbers from the previous 5 years, that's roughly the same. So it does suggest that, healthy, substantial portion of the U.S. population still creates art of their own. And that, of course, is extremely important to our chair's mission. And she keeps talking about not only, understanding how art goers and going to arts events is a critical part of the arts ecosystem, but also people independently creating art, or living artful lives, as she calls it, which could involve creating art or doing something with a design in your house, or, really informal, if I can say so, ways of engaging with the arts that may not involve necessarily going off to, say, an opera performance in a really fine art symphony hall or something like that.
That leads to the question of how all of this translates into, say, an activity like grant making. And let me just make up an example. Ballet, something I actually don't know anything about. I mean, I'm impressed when I see ballet dancers. I don't know how the heck they do it, but they are quite talented. And let's say that the interest on the consumption side is going down for something like that. People don't watch ballet except at Christmas time, say. How would that translate back into grant making? I mean, how do you know whether to conclude, well, there's no sense in investing grants in this because it's a dying form? Or can we invest in this and revive this form? I mean, how does that all work?
Yes, well, I try to be humble and recognize that while we do collect data and try to analyze it and certainly integrate it in decision making for the agency with our senior leadership, we do have a statute and it's very clear about what we fund. And we, in fact, have criteria by which grants get reviewed by citizen expert panels across the country. So really, something like ballet, just to take that example, the projects would be reviewed on their individual excellence and merit, which are the two overarching criteria. And more recently, our chair has actually helped to modify the way we look at those criteria by understanding that when we say excellence, for example, they may not mean only, say, excellence of the execution of a work, but the processes by which the work comes into being. So engaging with community members, for example, if it's relevant to the work. There's a lot of increasingly there's a great deal of artwork that now is, let's say, delving into other domains of human experience, whether it's arts and health or arts and education, and trying to reach broader audiences. And so understanding the merits of the work and the excellence of the work has to do with recognizing, the sort of so what factor. Like, not only is the work, excellent on its own terms, but is it in fact contributing